Okay, good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Tanya Peacock. I'm an assistant professor here at the Army Baylor program, and I want to welcome all of you to the afternoon portion of our program. The first thing that we're going to go ahead and start off with is a preceptor panel discussion. Now, the purpose of this panel discussion is to provide an opportunity for some of our more seasoned preceptors to share their leading practices with the field. Also, we want it to be more of an open dialogue as well. So we'll start off with some particular questions, but then towards the end, what I'd like to see is some audience participation, and feel free to ask some of the questions that you may have had, particularly as we went through the program this morning. Now, we have selected our 4 preceptors here based not only on their experience, but also the types of facilities that they operate in. First of all, we have 2 individuals from civilian facilities and 2 from military facilities. We have Mr. Chris Rainey from Mission Trail Baptist Hospital. We have Mr. Lowell Glassburn from UT Health Science Center. We have Lieutenant Colonel Eric Polson from Evans Army Community Hospital, and Lieutenant Colonel Colleen Reichenberg from SAMC, or San Antonio Military Medical Center. Now, they switched their seating up on me, so I didn't necessarily introduce them in the order that they're sitting in. But what I would like to invite them to do right now, before we start with the questions, is to just provide a short bio or a short introduction, giving us a little bit about your background and the number of years that you've been a preceptor. Lowell, if we could start with you, please.
Certainly. One thing I didn't mention during the introductions earlier was I am a retired Air Force MSc. I retired out of Lackland Air Force Base as the 37th Med Group Administrator, and it prepared me very well for the current position I have. You kind of look for that transition into the civilian job when you're ready to retire, and I did GME at the Lackland, and in the military I was at AFPC before, and so it was a perfect transition to go over to the UT Health Science Center. Never had done radiology before, but it was a very nice transition. I'd done primary care all the time, but radiology relates to every specialty, just as like family medicine almost relates to every specialty. So I've been over there since 2009. I picked up residents. Basically, my first year there, I'd had some residents rotate through when I was at Lackland, and so I instantly called my contacts and said, hey, I could use some residents over here, and I think it'd be a great experience for them. So I'm on this will be my 6th year as a preceptor. Anyway, it's been a great experience. I'll be glad to share what I know.
Hello, Eric Polson. I'm a Baylor graduate from class of 2002. I'm starting my 3rd year as a preceptor with the program. I think the keys certainly to building quality residents and is a balance of the education that they're provided in that first year, balancing that out with the experiences that they're going to gain in that year, as well as some sort of professional affiliation. And tying those 3 things together really rounds out those experiences. I was very fortunate. After my Baylor residency, I was able to do a utilization at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I had jobs as administrator in primary care and then chief managed care at Darnell at Fort Hood. And I'm in my 3rd DCA job. And I would say, also very key is having those types of experiences in business operations, managed care, administrator jobs that kind of round you out and build you professionally to be able to take on new jobs and experiences. So also aligning that utilization tour for our residents so that they have the right job to go into following their residency, and you can even start thinking about that, preparing them for that in how you develop residency projects and assignments.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Rainey, and I guess I'm probably one of the more newly retired folks here. I've been working for Baptist Health System now for about 15 months down at Mission Trail Baptist Hospital as the Associate Chief Operating Officer there. And I was very fortunate right away to last summer to get a Baylor resident. Just did tremendous work for us, and it was a great experience. I think both for him in terms of learning as well as for us in terms of really needing someone with experience and with the knowledge to be able to take us to the next level for a number of other of different projects that we had. I retired out of MedCom headquarters, where I worked in the G8, the Cost Management Analysis and Partnerships branch. That was my last job that I retired from. Prior to that, spent some time over in Germany as a clinic commander. Prior to that, was at 4 years at Fort Belvoir, actually. First as the Chief of Resource Management Division, and then as the DCA. Very fortunate during transition to the JTF CapMed and the transition to the new hospital there, getting to work on everything from design to planning with the JTF CapMed and planning a whole new facility, and seeing it come from the ground up to where it was ready to be occupied, and all the planning required for that was a great learning experience for me. And then also the two Baylor residents that we had during that 4 years there, I think it was a great opportunity for them to sort of see from going from current ops to a future ops and still trying to maintain things at the same time. I was a 70 Charlie by trade, and actually got that after Baylor. I was a class of 03. Prior to that, I was logistics. I've been mainly FA90, for those of you who know what that is, in the TO&E side of things. I spent my first 10 years with the line units. So really have enjoyed my time, not only as a Baylor student, but as a resident. I got to be a resident at Brooke Army Medical Center along with Forrest, and that was a great experience. We had great preceptor and leaders there, and were able to learn a tremendous amount. So really looking forward for another opportunity this year to be able to work with a Baylor resident. You always learn something new as a preceptor, and it's great to see the quality just improve over the years as they learn more and more, and as the program improves over time, which is what we want to see. So thank you.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Colleen Reichenberg. I'm the CFO at BAMC. This is going to be my second year. I'm not sure they picked me because I had that many years of experience as a preceptor, but I'm a little bit different in that the students that I have as a preceptor for Baylor are also comptroller interns. So I manage the comptroller internship program at BAMC, and so they're dual-hatted in that 1 year experience, and they become credentialed and certified comptrollers at the end of that year as well. My background, I've been a DCA once and done a couple CFO jobs, so I've kind of had a mix of both. One of the things I thought to bring up to this group was kind of interesting. The comptroller interns that come into our program, we had 4 last year. 1 was a Baylor resident, and then the other 3 were just comptroller interns. They go through several different kinds of master's programs. So we have the Syracuse program is pretty big for us. It's an MBA, MPA program. Or they go to the Master's in Legislative Affairs at George Washington University, or one that I had this past year went to Harvard for the Legislative Affairs program. Or they'll do a School of Choice MBA program. One of the things, the Baylor students, one of the things that I heard a lot was from those people that went through the other MBA or master's programs were very envious of the Baylor students having gone through the MHA and MBA program, and then they didn't feel like they had as good of an education rounded around the hospital operations. A lot of their MBA programs were focused on widgets and marketing projects for Frito-Lay, where in the Baylor program you still get that MBA flavor, or you still get the MBA, but a lot of the flavor is towards healthcare operations. So they felt better prepared in the Baylor dual master's program than in some of the other MBA programs that the comptrollers get to go through. So when the comptrollers come to their internships, they always kind of feel like they have to catch up with the Baylor residents. So I thought that was pretty interesting, having both of those kinds of students there this year. At BAMC, we have 2 preceptors. Colonel Swafford, the DCA, is the other preceptor, so he has just the Baylor students, and then I get the Baylor and comptroller students together.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for that brief introduction. So what I would like to highlight initially is to talk about how to prepare for the residency year, particularly for some of our newer preceptors. So, Lowell, I was wondering if you could start off with us as far as talking about how do you prepare to receive your resident? What kinds of things do you do prior to getting to know them, prior to that initial meeting, to ensure that you're setting that resident up for success?
There's several things that could go along with it. I guess you could back up even to the point of logistically, how does my institution prepare for them to come? I'll start there because we have to get them like a security clearance check. They do they're called person of interest is for a better definition. They have to get parking passes, get them in our HR system, get them office space, computers, all that stuff. So logistically, we prepare for them that way. The other thing that's an advantage to me here being in San Antonio is pretty much I have to do a marketing pitch, I think, to a lot of the residents, or at least when I've started out. Because when they hear UT Health Science Center, I think some of them wonder what's available there. And so I can actually meet with them. So I arranged to give them a tour of the facility while they're still in the program here during the didactic phase, and give them a tour of our facility as well as the University Hospital, which is actually not part of University of Texas Health Science Center. It's the county hospital, and then the VA. We're all three connected. So I give them a tour of the three facilities, talk about our practice plan. I've already been over their resumes. And then when they do finally arrive, after we've got them all arranged, I kind of just sit down with them and go over kind of like, here's the things I see as some important things, but what do you want to gain from this experience? Because I know what I need to have accomplished. And the things, as a former administrator, I had what were called flight commanders for those in the Air Force. And so I kind of treat them as a flight commander and say, here are the projects I'm going to put you on, here's the things I'm going to do. Here's the things that you can help me with. Here's the things, how do these fit in with what you want? And then what did you see as your needs? And they emphasize areas they want to get into. And then anything I can't meet within my departments, I will go out and talk to the other department administrators like Irma, who has her own now, so I can't do that anymore. But I will go out and talk to them, and we just look to see how we're going to meet their needs. And then we kind of just balance it all year long. They'll automatically get a rotation through our revenue cycle. That's one of the things all of them are interested in, because finances, I always joke with whenever I went back to conferences that had my former military peers in it, I laugh with them and say, because I was an RMO 3 different times, and I'm like, I didn't know money. It's real money on the outside, and I have to make my budget. You know, there's no backup for me. And so that's what I really want them to understand, is how the money, from the minute the patient makes the appointment to the minute the patient's done, how do you collect the money for seeing that patient? And so I get them through the revenue cycle as one of the very initial things, which includes coding and billing and collections.
That's great. Eric, do you have something you would like to add?
I think the only other key piece to add on to that is recognizing you're really setting up a very personal working relationship with that one or two residents. And so I do have a personal information worksheet that I start out with that gives me insights into their strengths, what they believe their weaknesses are, what are their interests, details about their family, and you know, what are their prior, you know, looking at their record brief and what types of jobs have they already had. You know, getting a really good handle on and who do I have, what drives them, what motivates them, and recognizing, you know, this is not just a 1 year of mentorship and coaching. You're establishing what can be a lifelong relationship with this person as a career coach, and so getting to know them on a personal level, I think is really a key aspect. Certainly, the orientation to the organization and expectations. But figuring out what makes them tick and setting some expectations up front as well.
Chris, do you do some of the same things in your facility?
Sure. I would say one of the things, just adding on to what Eric said, is really trying to tailor, do some planning to tailor the experience for the resident for the upcoming year. So anything, you know, that you can look at it. I mean, for us, we have a number of residents within the system, so we get to see resumes and those kind of things ahead of time. So getting a sense of, like Eric said, what they've actually done, what their experiences have been, and getting to really talk to them about what they've worked on throughout their career, what they have felt like they were real successful at, where they felt like maybe they could have sharpened the edges in some places, or maybe even where they had a failure, where they feel like they still need to build on. And then, of course, some of these new documents that Baylor has come up with. If you know, it was the first time I think I'd seen these as well, in terms of the self-assessments through the BEAR and everything, and seeing where the gaps might be really helps in sort of planning out that residency plan for the year and seeing where can we sort of match up their skills and abilities and needs with what we might have. And it gets real useful. I mean, I remember like at Belvoir, this was great, and we're trying to do that now here at Baptist. But when you have consecutive residents, or when you know, maybe not every year, but you're going to get one, you can sort of let your leaders and directors know within the organization. They know what they can do, and then so you start soliciting in a cyclic manner, hey, what are projects that you think would be useful for the Baylor resident coming in? If we get one this next year, when we get one, and then you can sort of have some things teed up as well. And so then once you get a sense of the actual resident, you know, where does that sort of match up or not? You know, and it doesn't have to be laid out and locked in stone, but then at least you have a menu of some things that you can start them on the hunt or the trail to look to see if that might be a successful project. You can see, you know, for example, for us, this last year we had a nurse who had very strong clinical skills and everything. We needed some help on some things on our nursing units. That was an opportunity to use his strengths, but then there were some things that he needed to work on in terms of IT. We had a whole IT sort of rejuvenation project. We knew that he'd never done anything like that, so that would be a great opportunity to make him a project lead for that. And so then I think once you build on that, then you can start sort of getting that foundation and getting into that cycle of prepping for the resident and then trying to match that up so that their portfolio, they have something to work with from the beginning rather than spending the first 60 to 90 days really digging to find good projects.
Colleen?
I think what was most helpful for me and for the residents, we sat down with that schedule and really worked the schedule. Made them put their leaves in advance. We planned out when all the suspected TDYs were going to be. And even if we didn't know exactly where they were, we planned a spot for them on the schedule. And then if we had to flip a rotation because that TDY went 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after, then we could do that. We even had a backup of these are extra rotations that if one of these TDYs fall out or one of these rotations fall out, which one are we going to put in there? And that really helped keep people on target to fill in every single week what they were going to be doing in that rotation and then have the extras left over. What I also found helpful was even before your residents get there, I would talk to the executive staff, the commander, your CEO, your other chief leads, your chiefs of logistics and facilities, and all these nursing, all the places that you're going to want your residents to rotate, and advertise who these people are. And I found it helpful that I was the one that requested that the resident do a rotation through that department and not just have the resident go try and find somebody from Department of Logistics to go do a rotation with. I found those are not very helpful types of rotations. They may ask the wrong person. They may sit in one person's office for a week and not get a very beneficial rotation. So I had the residents do formal requests for internship rotations. And so they would send a formalized letter with my signature on it, requesting that they go through introducing themselves and requesting a certain date or a couple different dates to go through and do the rotation, and ask for a formal email back saying, yes, I'd love to have you, this is the week we'll take you, and this is the plan. So then that's when we would lock it into the schedule, or we would flip it around in the schedule if something came up. Going over that schedule at least once a month was helpful. As things came up and changed, then you could maneuver it around. But if you're too lazy on the schedule, things will start falling off. Somebody that was supposed to be doing their logistics rotation ended up not being there that week, and so they sit around in the office all week because they had a logistics rotation planned, and now there's no logistics person there for them. So we stayed on top of the schedule. We had 4 different people. The comptroller interns do a lot of the rotations with the Baylor resident in a cohort together. So we were trying to coordinate 4 people doing all of these rotations at the same time. So sometimes it can be overwhelming for one of the departments to have to deal with 4 people at one time. So sometimes we broke it up and had 2 people do the rotation then, and then the next month they got the other 2 people. So if you have more than one resident sometimes you might have to do that to not overwhelm the department by taking care of 4 different people. But some of them might prefer to have them all at one time so you don't take up their time 2 different times. I also had them send thank you notes after it was over. Once they're done, they send a formal thank you note and they sign it, saying a little bit about what they learned during their rotation. And so I thought that was very beneficial to the chiefs of the departments to really see what benefit they gave to that resident, and then likely the next year they'll remember that and be willing to take on the next resident or the next intern and give them a good rotation. If you advertise it, like I said, that's helpful, and if the chief nurse and the chief medical director and the chief administrator know about it, they're more likely to push it to their department chiefs as important to be part of the education of the residents.
Now, Chris, I know you touched on this a little bit in your previous answer, but one of the things that we're interested in is making sure that our students are developed with respect to their weakest competency area. So, Eric, if you don't mind starting off, is there a certain technique that you use at your facility in order to ensure that your resident is either exposed or does a project or a rotation in their weakest area, and how do you manage that?
I think the setting up a very regular schedule. I had a block of time, usually 30 to 60 minutes every Thursday morning, and I looked forward to that time. It's so much different than what I do as a COO on every other day and all of my other time. And really, for me, it's a time to sit back and kind of get insights into. Let's first talk about what did you do last week, what things did you observe, what were you learning about it so far. But then also a lot of it came into, okay, now next week you're going to X, and we'll talk about a specific department that they're going to, and specifically I'll give insights into, at the executive committee level, these are some of the concerns that I hear of, I'm aware of, and things that you might want to look into as it relates to whether it's productivity of this department, the organizational dynamics and behavior that are going on in a department, and how they might approach those. And in those discussions, it ensures to me that they're getting some value out of the rotations and that direct feedback. It also is great insights to me. As you all know, you don't have the time to spend a week with Department of Radiology, let's say, but you'll gain so much more insights back that I felt like I was learning tremendously about observations that they're making. So in that, it helped me understand what were some of the strengths and maybe what things did they miss last week, and it gives me insights into maybe some weaknesses or some areas that we could kind of tweak for where they go next.
Chris, do you have more that you want to add on the topic?
Sure. I think that the weekly meetings are a must, both, as Eric said, for the benefit of the student, to guide them sort of as they're going along, because you can pretty quickly realize you're pretty far down the road and you've missed an opportunity, or you need to give a little guidance to direct back. But like Eric said, I definitely think it also opens your eyes to a lot of things that are going on that maybe also are opportunities. And if the student shows good initiative and they have done a good self-assessment and they're very self-aware of where their weaknesses are, then they'll also be looking for those opportunities to, hey, can I exploit this opportunity because I know that it will help me grow in this one area. I think 2 things. I don't think that there's any one area necessarily when you look at the bear and the tool, the self-assessment piece, and then as you're going through and you're assessing the student and helping them grow where you see the gaps. I think that helps because there'll be multiple areas where they can grow in. So not only a project may have a major focus, but there's certainly other avenues that they can use within that project to integrate some of those other weaknesses, and you can help emphasize those and maybe lead them down another aspect of that project that will help them grow in that dimension. If not, I think this is where the flexibility comes in, and sort of being aware of all the different things that are going on in the hospital or opportunities. Like I said, for us, my resident this past year had a weakness for having not really worked any direct IT projects. And we had an opportunity late in the fiscal year where, believe it or not, this does happen in the civilian world as well. Hey, we've got money, what do you have ready right now in the IT world? And so we were a facility that opened in 2011. We were the only facility in the system to use Vocera, if you're familiar with that device. It's a great communication tool. However, many had been lost. There had never been any software upgrades. People weren't using it. They said that it didn't work. So, and it was part of our nurse escalation system and everything else. So we decided, hey, we're gonna invest the capital and we're gonna revitalize our Vocera. We're gonna upgrade our servers. We're gonna get new devices. Because now there's a whole other model that's out there. It's a lot better, etc. And so that was an opportunity. And so I told David, hey, guess what? Also, because our hospital, unlike many of the military hospitals that I've worked in, is very, very lean. At that point, I had one IT person in my entire hospital. So, and this was someone running around, trying to fix stuff all the time. So I said, guess what, President, you're going to be my project manager for Vocera. To include looking at what all the problems are currently, helping work with the support services to make sure that we get the upgrades done properly. There's a lot of equipment pieces to this. We have a timeline. There's a training component to this. There's an accountability piece to turning in old devices and getting the new devices, getting people to use that. So it was a great opportunity, and that was one of his weaknesses, and he was nervous about it. So in that case, sometimes we met more frequently. He was in charge of a weekly meeting on this project management type of thing. And but I think he learned a ton from it, and certainly dug and helped me learn some more things about my own organization that were great. So I think really, again, the flexibility and looking at opportunities that are out there to integrate the student, and it might not always be something like that where it's, hey, it's all going to work on those particular dimensions right there, but other projects may have supporting dimensions that you can focus on and maybe develop some more. So I think planning and getting the base plan out there, but then being flexible and looking for those opportunities, and I think frequency of communication is huge in that, to be able to develop that.
Colleen?
So I had, like I said, I had 3 interns and 1 Baylor resident, and a lot of times they would work on kind of large projects together. The comptroller interns didn't have to write it up, but my 1 Baylor resident would usually take the opportunity to use that as one of his projects to write up for the portfolio. And so I appreciate some of the specific things you talked about in the how to do the portfolio, and I think probably one of the weaknesses and one of the things he turned in this year was his specific contribution, not necessarily the group, what the group did, but it became very apparent very quickly that one person in that group had less analytical skills than the other 3. 3 of them were very strong in analytical skills, and the other person was not. So I made sure that when we had another analytical project, that person took lead on that project and was able to articulate his knowledge or get some help so that he could do the bulk of the work on that project, rather than kind of sitting back and letting everybody else kind of do the analytics on it, and then kind of do the things that were non-analytical, because that's where the comfort zone was. Kind of push them to do a project that they're weak on.
Lowell?
Yeah, I'd just like to caveat or emphasize the weekly meetings, or however often the meetings. I have scheduled meetings with mine, but be available when there's the unscheduled time, because it's when they want to talk, they want to talk. And so just, they have my text. I get texts from them. I get emails from them. I work in multiple offices on the campus, and so one works in one of my buildings, one works in the other building. They're like, are you coming over today? I need to talk to you. So just be available for them. And really, to identify their weaknesses, you really have to develop that relationship with them and understand them. Because every one of them has a different personality type. I had one 4 years ago who'd been a prior wing exec officer, and every morning when I'm in there, I come in early before work starts to get my work done, but she's in there to give me a report, on what she's going to do for the day. I'm like, I just had to adapt to that, because that was her way of communicating with me of what was going on. And so you just have to kind of be just flexible with them. But like she said, when you identify a weakness, when you have more than one, it becomes easier to identify weaknesses, because you can see, and all you do is just say, okay, I see this person's not doing that, so the next project out is going to be this person's in charge instead of somebody else. So.
I know we talked a lot about this as well, as far as keeping a schedule and staying on the timeline. But what I want to get at with this next question is, with respect to timelines, how did you tie in the academic advisor into the process, as far as ensuring your students met the required timelines and integrating that communication with the academic advisor? Chris, would you like to start off?
Sure. Well, I'll tell, I guess, a tale of two Baylor residents here for this one. A number of years ago when I was at Belvoir, I had sort of almost a disastrous experience with this, where the resident did not keep up with that, and it came time to turn in the projects and was well behind, and almost did not succeed because of that, because of rewrites and stuff. And I take responsibility for that, and this was one who had multiple things going on as well, so not just the pure MHA piece, but the MBA piece, and then actually another comptroller piece to that as well. So a lot of challenges associated with that, and not any excuse, but it just highlights how you've got to stay on it. You owe it to them. As a preceptor, again, it's part of your credentials and reflection on you how well they're able to keep up with those timelines, and whether or not you've given them, enough guidance to make sure that they're going to be successful on that. So that's student one, and then resident two, just wow. Was on it, doggone it, and sort of like the former exec or whatever, coming in ahead of time, but always was showing the initiative, coming in and saying, hey, I've got this due in 2 weeks. Can you go ahead and review this? It'd be great if you can get this back to me by Friday when we meet and we can discuss it. Oh, by the way, here, my academic advisor has given me these comments, and, what do you think? And, communication back and forth via email as well, so that it was documented in terms of what was due and what issues there were and what changes might need to be made. And so stayed well ahead of the timeline. As a matter of fact, the comment to me was that, hey, I've been talking to a lot of the other residents, and I'm really worried about them because they seem to be not, keeping up at the same level that I have. And I thought I was behind, but wow, I actually feel pretty good right now because, I've got about 5 projects cooking, and, most of them are almost to completion. And, so again, you can get that. You will get those who are self-starters, who have the management skills, the leadership skills, who maybe are able to do that, and then you're going to get the ones that are just going to sort of, okay, I'm going to go through and do what I got to do, and do my rotations, or focus on the other things that I'm asked to focus on, or it's kind of the take the knee and be with the family time, or whatever, and you just got to recognize that, and I guess as preceptor, again, have that adaptive leadership style to make sure you push when you need to and ask those tough questions and push them, and then also give them the freedom to really maneuver and exploit, the capabilities that they've got, and move forward with that. But that's my story.
Helen?
I don't think I did a good job this year. I'm gonna try and be better next year. My Baylor resident was way on top of all of his timelines. His academic advisor switched out kind of mid-year. I need to do a better job, and I think will help. What I did not do, or make sure that the resident did on the schedule, was integrate the due dates for a lot of the different projects inside your rotation schedule. So when you meet on the rotation schedule, you can say, hey, remember, you're supposed to have a draft, so you need to get it to me by 2 weeks ahead of time, because if I have some rewrites, then you have time to do rewrites. I was really on top of the schedule of the rotations, not as much on top of the academic requirements and when they were due back to the academic advisor. So this year I'm going to integrate that into the schedule to stay on top of it a little bit better. Fortunately, we didn't have any ultimate problems of getting everything turned in on time, and he did more projects, I guess, than 4. So we were hoping if one of them didn't fly, that at least the other 4 would. But I think that'll be a good management tool if you integrate that. I use the calendar invitations too, like the Outlook calendar. So when they were doing schedules, when things were due, I would put a 6 months out even calendar invite on my calendar and their calendar to remind us both of when things were due, because sometimes we just get involved in our own job and then forget our requirement to make sure that the residents have their stuff turned in. So use of the calendar and the schedule definitely, I think, help.
Bo?
I think I've been very fortunate because I've had some outstanding residents come through. Everybody that comes through this program is very driven. You know, I think that's the one benefit of getting somebody from the Baylor program. And so they're all pretty on top of the game. Usually if you get two, there's always one alpha, you know, somebody who's going to take charge, and they usually keep the other one in line, at least for me. I do always ask them, you know, I'll ask them the first time so I don't have to whip out my residency manual. I'm like, when's your first project due? When's your first, you know, submission due? And they know, you know, or they'll go back and look and get it to me. So I kind of put the onus on them, because my one lesson learned from the Air Force was, even though you can have mentors and everything, one person's in charge of making sure your career is successful, you. And so I kind of get that and put the onus on them to be responsible for themselves, and nobody's let me down so far, so that's been really nice. Yeah, it's been a great experience. I mean, the other thing that I have that from the very first residents is they kind of did, we have a share drive, and there's a residency folder out there, and each year they have like lessons learned that they leave each other and pass on to the other residents, so they can say, okay, make sure you go visit this area, or make sure you don't forget about this, or watch these things. So they're very good at taking care of each other.
Eric?
The only other thing to add was in the first half of their year, probably by the November timeframe, I sent an update to each of their academic advisors via email. And it was just really an outreach and said, this is how Major so-and-so is doing. He's been working on this or that. Here's about 3 or 4 project ideas and his progress and kind of how those are developing. And, you know, it just facilitated a little bit of a conversation. I will tell you, I think the program does a great job with the quarterly Preceptors telephone conferences. If you're able to participate in those, I highly recommend it, because it also, Michelle, you do a really good job of outlining these are the requirements that are coming up, this is the next thing that's due, and that keeps me on track, so that, you know, I provide that same notes and feedback to the residents right away after that call, so that they're hearing it from a couple different angles. And pushing to keep us ahead of timelines.
Great. Now, as far as portfolio project selection is concerned, how did you effectively balance the needs of your facility with the needs of the students as far as development is concerned? Colleen?
So we have quite a few Baylor residents in our facility and interns. So we are always on the lookout for topics. So we kind of have a repository of topics to, you know, whenever somebody needs something to do. We've even given some of our topics back to on the academic side for some of the people that are still in the academic classroom to work on for us. So we really never have a shortage of projects. But I don't like assigning projects that are just, you know, good topics. I really like when something comes up that can help the facility at the same time, would be a good academic exercise as well as help the facility. So I think one of our kind of crowning projects for this year, when I took over as the CFO at BAMC, one of my first meetings, they were flashing up this slide that had productivity information on it, you know, how productive were each of the clinics. And then each clinic had another line on the chart, and it was supposed to be their cost. I'm not sure anybody had, I asked, well, where did that information come from? And nobody could tell me how they produced that information, but should it come out of my shop? So it was the very first project that we put the interns on, and they really got to dig into the cost data for the hospital, and were able to revamp that entire presentation to show proper cost data for each one of the departments. And it was enough work for 4 of them to really work on it. So that just presented itself, but it was a great project, and it showed them the difference between you know, financial databases and the cost accounting databases, and what does, you know, using your audience who are you briefing, and what do they really need to know, and what can they affect, and what information do you put in there, and how do you explain it. And so I tried to use those opportunities that could help both, and then when we had to beef up the number of projects, then we went back to that repository of these are these projects that have been hanging out for a while because we need an extra one for you to talk about. But I always like the majority of them to be something that they could really see a benefit from, because I think that motivates them. They always seem to be much more motivated about their project if they were able to brief it to the commander, if somebody in the facility was able to use their information. And at least on the military side, we have OERs, we have our evaluation reports that we have to do at the end of the year. So if you're in a military treatment facility, if you can give them some meat and potatoes to put into their evaluation reports to show, I did this project and it had this significant financial benefit or some sort of benefit to the organization, then it beefs up their evaluation and helps them, because you're getting an evaluation during a residency. It's kind of difficult to get a top evaluation when you're in a student status sometimes from people. So I think that helps them in their evaluation process as well.
Well,
first we start out with setting up a nice rotation schedule for all the residents to look at all the areas they want to go to, and then that usually gets thrown out the window about the first 3 months in, because it's been overcome by events and other real world things. And so we just kind of focus on, again, areas they're interested in, but areas that will benefit us too. But one of the big things is, I don't know if it's just timing or whatever, but my fires that come up that's good to put a resident on usually involve a bunch. When I look across your bear report on top, it's hitting way more than 5 of the areas, to put them on any one of those. The only thing I struggle with on my side is getting them some of the military specific ones. I do still know the readiness guy down at Wolford Hall and the RMOC guy here in town, but none of them have taken me up on going down and doing readiness stuff. They figure they get enough of that on their military side, so they want to learn the civilian stuff. So they're weak in that area. But again, I've been blessed with fortunate residents who just are really very. There's an alpha in the group, or if when I've had the 2 single ones, they're just very energetic and motivated, and they know what they want to learn, and they go out, and if it's not something I have that they need, I know who has that gap that can fill it for them, and I'll make the introduction for them, and then kind of put it on them. If they've got to be self-motivated to go out and learn that, I'll make the introduction, but they've got to go make it work for them. And then we kind of evaluate how that worked out. Because that's not succeeding is a lesson learned. So.
Question.
sir.
Just a general question, I guess, along the lines of the orientation, I guess an entire panel. Do you also have them rotate in other facilities, not just within your own facility? I'm just thinking about, I come from Houston, the Texas Medical Center is a very target-rich environment, from not-for-profit, for-profit, and you name it, it's there. So do you have to rotate in other organizations as well?
Absolutely. I think what Colleen was saying earlier about those introductions, I think that's a big role as a preceptor, is facilitating some of those relationships with the hospitals and medical centers in our area, Colorado Health Hospital Association up in Denver. We were able to use, and kind of tying back to the original question we're talking about, is making those residency experiences and finding projects, setting up a rotation with Colorado Hospital Association, and they were specifically doing a conference on high reliability organizations, and that was even before it really has become flourished across Army MedCom. So our nurse was able to pick up and attend one of those conferences up in Denver, and then we had her come back and present a leader professional development LPD program presentation back to the command and everyone. We've built it into our strategic plan. So that really developed into a portfolio project for her right off the bat. Additionally, I think the comments are spot on about finding a project that matches the interests, because the buy-in is so much greater from the resident's perspective. If this is something that also fits kind of their skills and interests, at least letting them do a couple that are that way, and then maybe a couple that stretch them into areas that they're weak or need to develop. The other one was example. We worked toward Voluntary Protection Program Level 3 Star Site certification that we earned this year, and our aviator that was with us as a resident, couple different times throughout the program. I could relate to him very well when he said, I've been all operational. I really haven't worked in a medac before I came here. And he even questioned what he had to bring to the table. And the more we talked about it, two of his portfolios really made an impact in our organization from a safety perspective. One was team steps. Everyone's heard about team communications and how key and critical that is. He set up with his partners over at 4th Combat Aviation Brigade, where a group of our leaders went out to their site. They presented us on aircrew coordination training, and then we presented them a presentation on team steps and how those two are similar, and compared and contrasted those. And then we used that as that was one of his portfolio projects, and it helped train our team on different ways to look at safety from the Army aviation industry. The other one that he did was on I think they're called reading card files used in the aviation industry. So when there's some sort of accident that occurs, I think of these kind of like a sentinel event with the Joint Commission. He created a reading card file in our operating rooms, and so they were there was a bulletin that's posted up on the wall, and there's a slot for every person that works in the OR, and they work in on different shifts, or if you're in a ward, there are multiple different shifts. Once you've read and acknowledged, you turn your card over, and so you could quickly see, if you're the supervisor of that ward or area, the impact that has. Has everyone seen this, and we can move on. So, I think those were a couple good examples.
I would say, I talked about this a little bit already, but again, being able to see where the gaps are and the bear is important. And for me, it was actually, and for our resident, this past year proved his worth so quickly that it was actually more playing a little bit of defense, because made an impact in this area, and they were like, oh, but we've got this and this and this. So it was almost, I had to give him some backup a couple of times to be able to say, look, I'm sorry, I love you guys, I did this, but I've got to move on to something else. I've got other gaps and some things that I need to fill over here. I need to help another department. There was actually more requests for those kinds of things than he had the time or energy to be able to do, and really had to focus on some of those where he needed to develop some more. And we coined this term, I think back, we probably didn't coin this term, but we lived it a lot, and I sort of rolled this down to my residents as well, with learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So you need to be put in some of those situations. If you're clinical, you're gonna be driven towards the clinical things that you know so well. If you've been in the ED or critical care, that's what you want to gravitate towards, and we've talked about that. But sometimes, hey, you got to go work with the facilities guys. You got to go learn what that's all about and how that impacts the things that maybe you understand clinically and everything, and how can you help them and develop a project there. So I think it's also, knowing where the gaps are, but being able to give them the overhead cover and empowerment to be able to say no and be able to move on to something else as well.
At this time, I know we got started a little bit later than we had anticipated. What I do want to do is ask one more question of our panelists and then open it up for discussion. And then we'll try and get back on our timeline then after this panel discussion. So my last question for the panelists is this. What do you think was the most challenging component with respect to developing and mentoring a resident? And if you can, please describe a challenge that you faced with a student and how you handled it. I guess we can start with Lowell.
Give me the question so I can look at my notes. No.
Or Chris, if you have something.
I can go ahead and get started. So one thing with a student this last year that I noticed right away was, I guess, and I don't know if this is so much, I guess it's not really a difference between the military and civilian, but our resident this year had a challenge with communicating and finding sort of what's the opportune time. A lot of times we would be having, a senior leadership discussion, would sort of be standing right there, and wanting to ask something or wanting to give input or whatever. And, and same thing with dealing with some of our directors and all. There was, how do you approach them? How do you gain their trust, communicate with them, build that relationship with them versus just sort of, injecting yourself into the situation and all. So like anything else, the meetings we have, the opportunities to share with them and give them some alternative ways to approach senior leadership, approach directors, gain trust, coach them a little bit on those opportunities, and give them some examples of how to do that. That was a challenge initially, but this resident took it all to heart, applied it, and then just took off with it. So in terms of being able to relate to senior leadership, to the directors and everything, really made a great adjustment there, and sort of really became self-aware of perhaps that early limitation, and then really did a good job in terms of self-management moving forward, and understanding, when's maybe an appropriate time to come ask for guidance, or to interrupt, or to be present, or when you're trying to get something started or build that relationship with the staff, how do you do that? How do you approach that? And I think that worked real well, and unfortunately that didn't take sort of the whole year to develop that. That was something early on with our organization, and they made the adjustment, and that worked well.
Eric?
Tanya, I think it's also recognition that these residents, like any of us in this room, are going to have things that come up during that year, sometimes of a personal nature. Sometimes it's really good news, like very early on, one of my residents mentioned, I'm pregnant and I'm expecting sometime during this residency year, and let's start planning now for how we work through that maternity leave time. And it absolutely, with proper planning, all those types of things. We talked earlier about an ILE course for someone if they have that opportunity to go away for 4 months. That flexibility is there, but there definitely takes planning and preparation for that. So when we did some adjustments of residency rotation times, we looked at those things that are already her strengths. Army nurse, she really knew, she had worked already in certain types of nursing environments, so we didn't need to have her specifically do those sections of the rotation. So we were able to kind of make some adjustments and plan ahead.
Cool.
I'll go with kind of I guess it's kind of a good challenge that was beneficial to my organization, but probably not best for the resident. I had one of my residents this year was so good, and as I said, I work in multiple buildings, and the one that's in, the way the funding goes on the academic side is one department funds me 70%, one department funds me 25%, the other one funds me 5%. Mm-hmm. And so I spend my time kind of equally amongst those departments. And I have one of the residents on my radiation oncology side. She's a nurse by trade, and I asked her to help out with some nursing issues. She was so good at it, I wanted her to do little things, but she was so good at it, the nurses actually almost started reporting to her and not me. And even to the point that it got to personal problems where there was a death of a significant other of one of the nurses, and she was the intermediary for all the communication. So I just had to say, please pass the person, my employee, back to me and remind them that you're not their supervisor. So, but she was so good that I had to just, I thanked her for how well she was doing and how she was handling the situation, but you're not responsible for that. So,
that's great. Colleen, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think my challenge was me more than the resident or the intern, because we do the comptroller internship combined with the Baylor residency. What I work on every day is CFO stuff. So I really struggled to remind myself and the resident that we had to focus on other areas other than just financials and analytics, and to force some of those projects that are outside of those topic areas where you're really comfortable with, because you find that if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, So I'll challenge you to go outside of your comfort zone, and even if you have to ask somebody outside of you, hey, do you have any projects from, go down to legal or go over to logistics or something like that and ask them for some project topics and things for them to work on, so that they don't get one-minded, because we tend to stay where we're comfortable.
Well, at this time, I'd like to invite anyone with a question to come to the center and use a microphone and ask questions of our panelists.
I have a question, or two questions actually. One is, from our program's perspective, is there anything we can do, and please don't say nothing, to make your experience as preceptors a little bit easier? And then my second question is, regarding our students, is there anything we could do to better prepare them for the residency? So is there anything you think that they're lacking when they come to you as residents?
I'll go on the first one. One of the comments I put on I didn't do the survey online, so I was late, but one of the things is there a feedback mechanism for me? I want to know if I'm being a successful preceptor. You know, am I meeting the needs of this program? Am I meeting the needs of the residents who are coming to me? And so if there's some way to implement a feedback mechanism so I can improve and make my precepting better to the students in your program, that would be beneficial.
That's a great comment.
And then getting to the second question, I might say that there could be some benefit. I know the academic advisors probably have 7 or 8 students each, and I could facilitate this myself, but maybe making it a more formal thing to actually do the outreach as an academic advisor early on, and kind of do a transition or a handoff to the preceptor and say, so this captain that you're getting generally has done very well in the program, however was had some trouble with these types of courses. Maybe some of that is done because they're just for the handful. I think 90% there's no problem at all. But I think if there is someone that the faculty are a little bit concerned about based on their didactic, facilitating that communication with the preceptor early on and saying, if there's anything that you can continue doing as an extension of the faculty in the second year, that would be helpful.
I know this is hard for all the locations, spread across the map of, the United States and Europe and everywhere else that we have students go. But, as for those that are local or as they're out on their travels, I think even, it doesn't always have to be necessarily the advisor, but, I really appreciated Misha came out as we were sort of saying goodbye to our resident this year because he had to go to CGSC and left us a little early. But Misha came out and was present at that sort of farewell for our Baylor resident, and that was just huge, I think, for our organization and also for the resident. So anything like that in terms of a handoff or a visit, or I don't know if even maybe a conference call with the student president and the preceptor maybe once during the year or something, just to talk about where we're at. To make sure that we're synchronized as a preceptor and an academic advisor, to make sure, the academic advisor has one perception, we have a different perception, and, I think just to make sure we're all on the same sheet of music. I think even, once or twice during the year being able to do something like that. I know some places are more sophisticated, can do VTC or whatever, but even I just think, whether it's VTC or, in person or even just a phone call once or twice during the year for the 3, or in Colleen's case, maybe 7 or whatever at once might be useful. So,
I just had one. It might seem silly, but I think we always did the preceptor teleconferences at the same time, and I always had a conflict with a standing meeting. So if it's always at that time, I'll always be unavailable. So I don't know if it's easier just to always, couple people just will never make the call, or to try and flip it around so that other people that have a conflict during that time could have an opportunity to dial in. That would be helpful.
I've had a couple different residents, and the first one I had was kind of the typical resident. They didn't spend a lot of time on the TO&E side. They went to the MTF. This is their first MTF experience. The second one I had was a civilian employee, and there were she was a good student and everything. There were some issues that I was not necessarily prepared for to deal with in this particular case. And so one of the things I would like to ask the program and the professors and so forth is, if there is a student that you have a special concern about, and sometimes it's really hard to quantify. You can't quite put your finger on it. But if there is a student that has, there's something that's just not quite right, but you can't really quantify it, let the preceptor know so that we can kind of work through those issues and try to figure out how to build something into the residency rotation plan that will help address those competencies, because it's not necessarily something that's on the competency list. It may be something that is just something you wouldn't totally expect. And I'll give you an example. On this particular resident, I'm not going to name names. Some of you know who the individual is. But very, very smart, made it through the class very, very well, and was very popular with her colleagues and so forth. When she got to the residency location, after about 4 or 5 months, it took that long to kind of for me to figure out what I thought was going on. I realized that this individual had, as she said, she had been raised by gypsies, quite literally, and so she had a cultural incompetence that was different than what we think about in terms of cultural competence. She did not understand how to interact in a management role with other people. And so because she had been homeschooled, so to speak, had gone from a Medicaid, AFDC kind of environment, worked her way through college, all that kind of stuff, but never really gained what we would think of as a middle-class culture or management cultural competency along the way. And so we had to kind of figure out how to get her to that kind of a role and an understanding where it wasn't academic. It was more, what kind of culture am I comfortable with, and how do I deal with these people who seem to have figured out how to interact in polite society in ways that I have no clue how to deal with it. And so it involved a series of movies, for example. I had her review My Fair Lady and The Help, and different things where I perceived that there were characters in these movies that were trying to figure out how to become culturally competent in polite society, and she still didn't quite figure it out. By the end, she got it, but it required some very interesting and challenging residency exercises that were not quite the same as what we normally think of in terms of health administration. So if you have a student, and please let us know so that we can sort of figure out and try to plan on how to deal with those kinds of issues, it would be helpful rather than kind of waiting 6 months down the road until we finally figure out that there's something that's not quite hitting on all cylinders.
I'm going to say something more commentary than question asking, but it grows out of experience that I had. I had a little over 30 years in the Air Force and now 33 in the civilian sector. And in the civilian sector, I often wished I had had more experience interfacing with the medical staff and clinical issues when I was on active duty. In addition to that, clinical quality metrics, which today are becoming so enormously important in regard to pay for performance, if nothing else, just understanding all that. And I'd highly recommend that opportunity be seized to introduce the residents to various clinical section meetings, medicine, surgery, whatever it happens to be, that they get a chance to get into the operating theater, that they spend a night or 3 in the hospital with a nighttime nursing supervisor, because the institution definitely changes complexion when their day shift goes home, and more of those kinds of things. In regard to physicians, I reflect many times on active duty, my interface with physicians was to get them to understand how they needed to play in the administrative game, instead of my trying to understand how I needed to play in the medical game. And as you undoubtedly know, that's our lifeblood. And even though that doesn't apply in the military sector, I think training them in that way, giving them exposure to it, is very, very important, along with the rapidly advancing clinical technology that is happening today. It's absolutely explosive. So I would just add that to your agenda for thought.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am?
So I think the Baylor program is excellent. I had an excellent resident. It was my first year. So my experience in mentoring, I've mentored MBA students. One of the things that I integrate is kind of talking about life balance, you know, because we all experience that. You know, we get overwhelmed in our jobs. Have you addressed in your coaching life balance coaching to our Baylor residents.
I think the key example was the maternity leave and making sure that that could be a very positive experience in light of trying to complete all of the pressures of getting all the portfolios accepted and so forth. I think it goes beyond the residents. As a COO, the example that I set, if I can try to leave by 6 p.m. every night, and I make a point to mention why I do that. If I need to make up time and there's an overabundance of work, I'll do it early morning. I think we were talking about that earlier on. Is if you're staying 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, as I know we've all seen people do and leaders do, the example that's setting for your staff is that that work-life balance is not that important to you, and eventually it's going to catch up to you as an organization because you'll end up with a whole lot more problems internal to your organization because of that balance is out of whack. So I appreciate that greatly.
I always start out with, in that introduction meeting with them when they first come on the first day, I basically start out with the institutional hours are 8 to 5. I will work blah, blah, blah hours. What hours will work best for you? Do you have any special needs? Sometimes they have small children at home or they have to get a child to school. So I let them flex their hours, whatever they need to do. Their hours are not my hours. I'll always emphasize that. I'll always say, I have this meeting that starts at 5:15. If you'd like to stay for it, you can. If you can't, that's fine. I'll tell you what happened. So I just kind of look at it that way.
And I think all of that, as we've all talked about and we all know, is just developing that relationship, understanding what's going on with them and their family and what's going on in their lives, and then making it a point to set the example, but also to make sure that they're taking that kind of time for things too. And sometimes that takes even, hey, you need to go do this or whatever. I had a resident who was spending some long hours and was doing some of those reverse cycle things and everything else, and I had to do some reminders of those things, saying, hey, you're doing great, you're training to standard and not to time, so make sure you're taking some time for your family, and when are you going to take this vacation that you said you were going to, and those kind of things. So pushing them and looking out for them so that they see that, just like everybody said.
Well, I personally want to thank all of our panelists today. They really provided some valuable insight. If we can give them all a round of applause. As you all probably realize, we're a little bit off of the schedule. If we can be back by 2:40.